and you can take it away.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. This is Jason Lane, and on behalf of the State University of New York and our Chancellor Nancy Zinfra, I want to welcome you all to the webinar today. As a system of 64 campuses and nearly 600,000 students, we've been deeply, deeply interested in understanding how do we scale best practices to drive student success and really to move the dial, the national dial on completion. And we're proud to be one of the sponsoring organizations of TS3 and a member of the TS3 Steering Committee. And I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, because we really believe that systems of higher education are an important higher education actor of the future, and really one of the most critical ways in which our country is going to address some of the most fundamental challenges facing higher ed. Not least of which being, how do we improve completion rates across this country in a way that is going to have an impact nationally. And so today, what we're hoping to do is provide you an overview of the TS3 initiative and why we think that the 3 best practices that have been identified by TS3 have the opportunity to move that dial on completion, and hopefully have a dialogue and conversation with you all about how we can collectively work toward this goal of improving completion. I'm joined today with some colleagues from other systems who are also members of the TS3 Steering Committee. Joe Boffman, who is the Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the University System of Maryland, who will be talking about Math Pathways. Ken O'Donnell, who is Associate Vice President of Student Success and Program Integration and Assessment at California State University, Dominga Hills, and has great experience also working at the California State system level on implementing high impact practices. And our fearless leader, Rebecca Martin, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of System Heads and has a wealth of experience, in particular working with the University of Wisconsin system. So with that, I want to turn it over to Rebecca to frame today's conversation. Rebecca?
Hey, thanks, Jason. So I know I don't have to tell this audience why it's important for more of our citizens to have college degrees. Here are some of the top line metrics about what that kind of impact we can have. So I think when you take a look at this, it should not be surprising to you that NASH's priorities we have twin priorities very closely linked together and to our initiative, and they are that we want to increase student success and we want to close equity gaps. So we're building on goals that you have set in your states, as well as national goals that have been set by President Obama, and various philanthropic organizations to move the needle on student success. Now we think that NASH can really make a difference in this because of the scale that we have available to us. 75% of the undergraduate population in 4-year institutions across the country are in our systems. So if we could move completion rates by just 5% across these systems, you can see what kind of impact it would have in terms of additional graduates, in terms of greater income, in terms of federal tax revenues. There are lots of different ways to measure this, and so we've been making the case to many of our colleagues that we should do this in NASH and we should do this together. We really believe that systems can make a difference. Here are some of the ways that we have seen our systems working together to advance the agenda. You know, we really think that a system can make a difference by coordinating and collaborating with campuses across the system so that these kinds of innovations are not put in place one campus at a time. Rather, that we will use collective impact to increase the results by moving together in a system. And then beyond that, we've decided in NASH that we should use the collective impact and the system effect to try to move together as a network of systems. So our goal then is to move the needle on our top priorities. Using collective impact, we've chosen interventions that are evidence-based, that improve student outcomes, that are being scaled up in at least one system, and where we can demonstrate improved outcomes for students of color and low-income students, helping us to close those equity gaps. These are the 3 interventions that we have selected: redesigning the math pathway, guided pathways using predictive analytics, and high-impact practices for all students. We'll talk a little bit about them in just a minute, but I guess what I would want to say is that we know what works, and now we have to make sure that what works is reaching more of our students. Our TS3 has been designed to allow for flexibility in implementation, so we're not looking at a specific predictive analytics product or a specific math pathway approach, rather trying to bring people together to really talk about the challenges in each of these arenas. We've created common definitions of success. We're looking for thresholds for adoption and diffusion, and we really believe that this will help move the agenda forward. So we're building momentum. We currently have 23 systems in taking student success to scale. We welcome new system partners and hope that some of you that are listening today will choose to join us after you've heard this presentation or had a chance to talk with us a little bit more about this. And as Jason mentioned, one of the things we want you to know that while NASH is providing kind of the backbone support for this initiative, it's really being led by systems. And you've got colleagues in 5 systems providing leadership to this initiative who are working together to both build the network to help us share best practices and challenges and provide the kind of leadership in their own systems by example that we can all learn from. So we're deriving collective impact by working with systems to develop that shared vision for success, by helping to establish standard definitions and metrics to build evidence. We're really just getting started on the data piece for this, and we could talk more about that if that's important to you to hear about today. But our focus today has really been on sharing of best practices and also cautionary tales across the system, so that the lessons that are learned in one system can be put to use in another as these innovations are put into place. We have been working together for 2 years using these kind of this frame to guide our progress. We've begun with mostly virtual connections, although last April we did convene the entire network. We've relied on webinars like this one by building a virtual place for where there are many resources available in each of the 3 interventions. But we've really focused all along on making it happen, on that implementation, not talking just about, oh, these are good ideas, but really giving our network members clear examples of how these various innovations are being implemented, being put into place, and what's being learned about that. So we will be having another convening in April, and we hope that at that point you will join us. So as I mentioned, our focus really has been to develop a network improvement community. And we've been doing this for the network as a whole, but we've also begun to focus that on each of these 3 interventions by really focusing on a well-specified common aim. And we've all agreed that not only do we want our students to succeed, but we have specific interventions that we know will help us move the needle, and we're going to work together on implementing those. So it's not 1,000 points of light. It's not going off in a million different directions. It's trying to pull together and move the agenda in ways that help us learn from each other. So what I'd like to do now is hand it off to Jason Lane, who is going to start with a description. Oh, I'm sorry. To Joe Bachman. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Who's going to start with a description of our work on redesigning the math pathway.
Thank you, Rebecca. This is Joe Bachman. I'm the Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at the University System of Maryland. And I'm going to actually run through several of these slides fairly quickly, but hopefully the visuals will have some impact on you. We know that redesigning math pathways works in a variety of ways. It's said by many people that math is the graveyard of student aspirations, and we are finding that true in so many ways. And what we are learning by talking with each other and sharing is that there are many ways to, in fact, help get us through these challenges and students through these graveyards, if you will. And one of the things that we found is that collaboration is everything. That learning all kinds of information from each other, because when we're dealing with the math pathways, we're talking across discipline. It's not just mathematicians that we need to be talking to. It's what math is needed in a variety of disciplines. We are talking across institutions. Transfer is incredibly important. And we're talking across segments, 4-year, 2-year, inside our systems, and with collaborations. So systems hold the key, we believe, to flipping this paradigm of scale. And here are a lot of institutions with one student, but we would prefer to flip that and, in fact, say that all of our interactions and support across systems, institutions, disciplines are holding up the individual student and bringing that student to thousands of students and their success. One of the areas of focus is students who need remediation, and we have some numbers here that I won't read. Each one of you know that these may be very conservative numbers. In fact, in our community college system in Maryland, it's nearly 70% of our students that need some remediation. So in fact, we are talking about students who need remediation in preparation for college credit-bearing courses, but students who are challenged even if they are deemed ready by several different kinds of testing as well. But what we know is that students who get through remediation in their first math course are much more likely to succeed. And one of the areas that we've been talking about is that this achievement gap goes across race, gender, SES. It's math fear is in all of us to a certain degree. If you look here, you can see that, in fact, it's not just students who are math fearful and know it, but those students who want to major in STEM, but then in fact end up moving out of STEM into other areas because math has been such a challenge for them. As I said, there are many different approaches to redesigning math pathways, and I want to give credit to Ori Treisman and the Dana Center at Texas for the huge amount of work they've done on QuantWay and StatWay, and some of our systems are using those, and later in the year we will have a variety of webinars that in fact go into more depth about those kinds of processes. But what we are finding is carefully redesigned pathways are leading to monumental gains. And as we said before, that when we go back to our core principles of talking with each other across systems and go to the highest level metrics, one of the things that we can demonstrate is huge impact with tens of thousands of more students succeeding than have. Let me spend just a couple of minutes on this one. For example, SUNY's efforts at adopting and scaling StatWay and QuantWay out of the Dana Center have led to 3 times the success in remedial math courses. Tennessee Board of Regents has been redesigning community college math, and they've seen a 45% increase in retention. And I believe it's in December that we'll have the webinar on the Tennessee Board of Regents' successes in co-requisite training in math. And here in Maryland, we've had a very different approach, and I think one of the reasons that I was asked to talk about this is that, in fact, this demonstrates just how different our approaches can be, but we can still be working together. Here in Maryland, our first challenge was the regulations, the state regulations, and 4-year math in high school and what the community colleges understood to be college ready. And so, in fact, we started by changing our laws and our regulations. Then we went for a first-in-the-world project, which we were successful in getting, thank heavens, so that, in fact, we are now not only working with 7 of our institutions within the system, but with 12 community colleges as well, and the other 7 community colleges that come on as affiliates. And we are redesigning our own courses so that we have the math professors from community colleges and our 4-year designing courses with outcomes-based assessment. And we are doing side-by-sides for those newly redesigned courses so that in a year we will have really solid data on the side-by-side. We have found in Maryland, a small state, we work together better face-to-face coming from the ground up. That may not be the best way for others, but once again, we will end up with the same kind of success matrix that we will see from others, and we'll be able to roll up those data and show volume impact. So the way we've approached our challenges a little bit differently, for the cost challenge, we went for a grant. For our lack of data, we've engaged our faculty from the bottom up. That also leads to hopefully the alleviation of some skepticism. The administrative silos, we've had to have student affairs and the academic affairs and the math departments in this all the way. But all of us have to worry about initiative fatigue. I have to get that in there just a little bit. But we have found, and I think this is one of the major things than the NASH TS3, and this goes across all of our initiatives. We need to have faculty and student buy-in. You have to have the appropriate professional development for your faculty members who are implementing these as you go. You have to understand why the data collection and analysis is important, reminding everybody we're always focused on quality, and you have to have what's going to happen after any trials or pilots that you do. But I would just leave my section by saying that the systems have an opportunity not only to have interaction with each other, but by bringing that systems focus to your campuses, you have more oomph and more evidence to, in fact, share with your campuses to show some of the things that are important. So I think we have a minute or two if people have any specific questions now. If not, we will go ahead and send it over to Jason.
Let's ask people to type their questions into the chat space that you saw at the beginning. Do you have any questions for Joe about the math redesign?
Oh, as you're thinking about if you have a question, I will tell you that in February we are going to be doing a webinar in this series that will go into much more depth about our specific process and our First in the World grant. Oh, my last name is Boughman, B-O-U-G-H-M-A-N. That was a question that somebody asked. Okay, Jason, do you want to pick up? If people have questions, you can still type them in and we can come back to them at the end. We'll make sure we capture the questions as you go.
Absolutely, happy to. Thanks, Joe. And first, before I move on, I was remiss at the very beginning for not thanking Lisa Raposo and Michaela Ream at the SUNY Center for Professional Development for the technical support today and the last several weeks in pulling this webinar together. Without them, we all wouldn't be here right now. So I want to move on and talk a little bit about the second intervention that TS3 has adopted, and it's about focusing on data analytics and specifically how we can use data analytics to better inform and drive student success. And why we think it's exciting, we know already there's a high level of enthusiasm for improving and scaling predictive analytic tools, and there are many of them out there. There are already pilots in place on many campuses, and some of them have showed pretty significant success for improving retention and completion rates. But there are also a lot of challenges. It may be difficult to convince campuses with tight budgets to invest in some of these tools, and we know that some of them can be quite expensive. There can be a lack of connective tissue to tie these tools together, many of them looking at particular components of student success without identifying how they all work collaboratively. And even though we may invest millions at some campuses in student success or in predictive analytics, if we can't teach people how to use them, then those tools become much less useful for driving student success. And so those are some of the things that are driving our thinking around predictive analytics. And I think this slide does a good job of showing us where we are and where we want to get to. This is from the Gates Foundation, thinking through the hierarchy of student success through action analytics. And obviously the pinnacle, the whole idea is we want to optimize student success. But before we get there, we need to raise awareness first and foremost about what these things are and how they can be used on our campuses. We then have to help campuses actually implement them in a way that's effective for their campus, then make it part of the whole student success paradigm so they aren't seen as ancillary, but they are embedded and core. And then ultimately we hope change the culture of campuses so that student success is being driven by performance measurement and improvement science. How do we get there? At TS3, we particularly have taken a focus on using predictive analytics as a way to develop degree pathways for students and helping them navigate that process from admission all the way through completion. I'm going to talk a little bit about what has happened under the leadership of Tristan Denley, who's one of our colleagues on TS3 at Tennessee Board of Regents. Then move a little bit into this idea of learning analytics, and then at the end talk about an exciting grant that we recently received from Gates that may help us and you all think through how do we actually implement these tools and help our faculty and advisors use them in more effective ways. And the idea is that essentially we have more and more data than we ever had before coming online, and data can be collected from a variety of sources. Learning management systems like Blackboard or DegreeWorks. It can be from Facebook and other social media sites. You can even get data from student cards, right? Looking at where they swipe their card, where they are, how much they're going to the cafeteria, and so forth. And so folks are using various components of this new big data era to look at how can we better understand the student experience from a data perspective, and then linking that to decisions about advising for students. In particular, Tristan had developed at Austin, PA, when he was provost there before moving to the system level, an initiative called Degree Compass. And Degree Compass was basically predicated on the idea of Netflix and Amazon, that if these corporations can look at consumer data and figure out what are the things they think you're going to be doing next and what you're going to like, why can't we do the same thing for student success, but in the way that says, what is the right next course for you where you're most likely to be successful, and make that right step toward completion. And so Degree Compass is an interactive tool that they've developed that allows students to see pathways toward completing their degree where it is most likely for them to be successful based upon others who have followed similar paths, and a version for advisors to be able to help advise students about what pathways they think that students could be most successful. There's a lot to be said about it, but just quickly I want to say some of the underlying science looks at things like what are critical courses for graduation. And so what they found at the Tennessee Board of Regents was English Composition 2 was a very critical course for completion. Those who completed this class with an A or B were more than 50% likely to go on and actually complete their degree. If they earned a C, which we often consider passing, they were less than 40% likely to end up completing their degree, and you can see the trail off there for D and F. So it wasn't just that passing English Composition was important. They realized that passing English Composition with an A or a B was very critical for moving to success. Similar analysis was done with microeconomics. You can see here the even more significant drop-off from B to C. So the students who, even though they may have passed, but they passed with a C, were very unlikely to move forward and actually complete their degree. And so being able to understand this allowed them to design programs that track students into microeconomics or English 2 at the right time in their degree program to be successful, and if they didn't pass with an A or B, to suggest they may want to retake it or need some additional assistance to make sure they can be successful down the road. That's just one aspect of all of this. But with using Degree Compass, you can see here that they were able to shrink the achievement gap. Essentially, what you see on the left are the average gap for all schedules for students without using Degree Compass, with white students being on the left, and there was a 2-point gap in achievement between white and non-white students, and when Degree Compass was implemented, that gap shrunk to less than 1% of a gap between white and non-white students. And so the recommended action that comes out of this for advisors, for example, is embedding critical courses at the right time in one's degree in a way that they would making sure they have the right preparation for those courses before they move into it, and understanding that if they don't reach the benchmark grades, that additional wraparound support would likely need to be in place to help them be successful down the road. And what they found at Austin, PA, just quickly, is they saw a 10% increase in graduation rates after implementing Degree Compass, and a 20% increase for low-income students in particular. And Georgia State University implementing a different version of predictive analytics, they saw a 64% increase in sophomores' likelihood of graduating, and have also looked at reducing the achievement gap as well. And in fact, you can look at across the country as systems and states implemented various forms of predictive analytics. We are seeing pretty significant changes in student success and the closing of the achievement gap as well. And what we want to, a little bit I was talking about learning analytics, as we move forward, just beyond thinking about what are the right pathways, we're more and more thinking also, can we use big data to better understand the effective use of teaching and learning activities within our scheduling. And so one example right now with SUNY we're looking at is, can we link applied learning opportunities, one form of high impact practices, to outcome data, right now looking at labor data. And so is there a difference between an internship in an accounting program versus a co-op in a history program? Does one actually have an impact while the other does not? Are there ways to think about the analytics, the activities in ways that we can actually identify that some of these interventions are actually having impacts on students once they leave college, noting all of the concerns about using just labor data for student success beyond completion, but it's the one we have right now. And just quickly what I want to say is part of what has happened through this learning network were several of our systems got together and put a proposal into GATES Foundation for some additional assistance in helping us improve work around data analytics. And so this year we've received the GATES grant from GATES to look at how do we improve the adoption of analytics interventions on campuses, helping faculty and staff understand why they matter and better integrating them into their practices. And so out of this, we hope will be a set of institutional readiness assessments to allow campuses to assess, are they really ready for moving into predictive analytics? If so, then how do you move through implementation and a set of rubrics being designed around those? Are there professional development workshops that could be taken synchronously or asynchronously to enable campuses and faculty and staff to better understand the power of predictive analytics and how to effectively use them for driving student success? We are hoping to develop a set of nationally accepted guiding principles around predictive analytics. This is such a nascent area that we still don't have a sense of what is good and what's bad. And then out of that, we've had a lot of requests from camp systems to help them think through a buying guide of how do all of these, what's the impact of the various predictive analytics tools that are out there, and how do you actually effectively evaluate them for the use in your campuses? So what I want to end with is saying this was a great example of how this network drove a collaborative proposal to get funding to help us all develop tools that will, at the end of the day, help improve student success. And of course, those who are involved in TS3 will have access to all of these tools once we finish developing them. And we hope we'll be involved in designing them as well. So let me stop there and just see if there are any questions from folks. Seeing none, Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good, Jason. Thank you. And also, before I go on, just a couple of points of personal privilege. First, I thought those two presentations were really good on both the math and the predictive analytics. We've been at this for a while, and we've heard these presentations a few times, but I'm glad this one is getting recorded. They really crystallized a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years. And then the other point that I wanted to make up front was just hello to everybody. It's really nice to see so many names I recognize on this list, and it's nice to know that we might all end up working together on a project like this one. I know we've been swimming in the same student success waters now for quite a while, some of us. And I feel like this network has an opportunity to accelerate some of that work by focusing on 3 interventions in particular. That collective impact model is slightly different from the past work that has brought us together in the past, where we were really each taking on the interventions that we wanted to. In this case, by focusing on just a handful, we're hoping to concentrate the efforts a little bit better and push us along at a better clip. The thing about high-impact practices that most of us are familiar with is literature that came out in 2007, 2008 from the Association of American Colleges and Universities and the National Survey of Student Engagement that brought together for the first time a set of experiential learning practices in higher ed that many of us felt intuitively worked well, but that hadn't been considered earlier as a group, and for which the researcher George Koo is finding really promising indications that these were good for student success and good for closing achievement gaps. And so in this network, what's exciting is a structured forum to share more of what we're learning from that kind of research, what's working, and an effort to shore up the research base a little bit, moving it beyond surveys and self-reported accounts of learning growth into something that we could have a little more confidence in from a perspective of policy or cost effectiveness. Doing that creates the challenges that you see on the slide around codification and scaling the selected interventions and sharing the measures of impact. We can call them high impact, but what do we mean by impact? And for that matter, what do we mean by high? And so the aim here is to create a body of evidence that would inform our efforts to scale and then target those high impact practices to the students who most stand to benefit. So there's a success play here, and there's definitely an equity play as well. But at the same time, we want to approach the work with some humility. We really are trying to put lightning in a bottle. I think a lot of these experiential practices, things like undergraduate research and service learning and learning communities, community engagement, some of us have firsthand experiences from when we were students of how powerful these are. And yet it can be a very hard thing to put a number on. You heard Jason mentioning a little earlier the hope that we have that we could somehow see whether internships are correlated with success in particular majors, for example. But as you even phrase the question, you realize different majors may picture internships very differently, so that the correlations and conclusions we would draw about success have to be tentative. And yet we know they're powerful experiences. We know there is lightning in that bottle. It's just a tricky thing to pin down. And so really all 3 of these interventions, the predictive analytics, the high impact practices, the quantitative reasoning pathways, we see them as mutually reinforcing. A word about the system where I work. I was in the Chancellor's office until about a month ago, and now I'm on a campus inside the same system. It's a system of 23 institutions. It's very large, all regional comprehensives with a mission of access as well as quality. We set out several years ago to improve our student success rates, and you can see from the red curve toward the bottom of that chart that it wasn't enough for us to raise all of our graduation rates. We wanted to see disproportionate benefits from the populations that are nationally categorized as underrepresented minority. That's already problematic for us in California and in many other states. They are not minority and they are not that underrepresented. They're just underserved, but that's the abbreviation we inherited. The high impact practices literature that began in 2008 pointed out a couple of things that suggested to us it would be a good tool to deploy with our graduation initiative. What Koo pointed out was that these boost student success, they deepen learning, and they close achievement gaps in the sense that the rates of impact are disproportionately high for students from traditionally underserved groups. So that looked like a pretty good way to get us closer to our goals for student success. The other thing that he pointed out, though, was that the students most likely to benefit are the least likely to opt in. And so we were looking for ways to target the interventions to students who may not feel that these practices are really for them. We had an institutional researcher at Cal State Northridge look at the numbers using not just messy survey data, but correlating it to the graduation rates of different populations at Cal State Northridge. This study was conducted using 2010 data, and you can see in the red bars on the left that the Latino population, which is the so-called underrepresented minority population that dominates at Cal State Northridge, was graduating at a 38% six-year rate, when you can just kind of barely see it, the zero at the base of that column. That's how many high-impact practices that students reported participating in. Next column over, that's a 1 and then a 2, and you can see that the graduation rates for the Latino populations are going up considerably. And at the same time, against the rest of the students at Cal State Northridge, we see similar gains, but from a better head start. And so it really is doing what Ku hypothesized, which is closing gaps. His data was mostly drawn from surveys and student self-report. The Northridge data strengthened that a bit by adding to it institutional records of student graduation rates. However, there are still some problems with the data that we want to take into account and maybe address as part of taking student success to scale. One, the self-reporting problem. We need better ways to track enrollment in these experiences as students go along. Somehow as part of the official institutional record set. And second, we would like to see more consistent definitions of high-impact practices so that they don't remain in the eyes of the beholder. So that if there are fruitful differences in the way an internship is structured for a historian versus a mathematician, that those are allowed to flourish, but that they're somehow reflected in the records so that we know when we're comparing apples to apples and when we aren't. In the CSU, at the system level, we did a few things with mandatory reporting to try to overcome that self-report problem so that we're not just asking students on surveys. But we continue to try to regularize the definitions of high-impact practices with rubrics, taxonomies, other structures that somehow accommodate variations in delivery, but nonetheless record and reflect those variations to inform the research base that we're trying to build together. To me, the challenge is epitomized by the director of service learning at the campus that I've now landed at, CSU Dominguez Hills. She was quoted in the Los Angeles Times saying about service learning, it gives meaning to students' education. It's not just about grades, not just about graduating. They're building self-efficacy. I think many of us in higher education would agree with that. And yet we'd also have to concede that the first two of those outcomes are much easier to measure than the third one. What we'd like to do is get to a point where we have reliable, meaningful assessments on all three. Do they persist? Do they flourish with a higher GPA? And are they picking up the kind of agency and self-efficacy that we expect college to give them? You can see on the chart how a learning outcomes matrix might eventually work, where for some interventions like course redesign and intrusive advising, we expect to see the gains in persistence and grade point average, and for that matter, content knowledge that we expect our students to have and that we're relatively comfortable measuring. But that as we move down the list to other kinds of high impact practice, like a learning community or on-campus employment or undergraduate research, we'd also expect to see gains in the student's ability to be creative and to take action on the student's own behalf. Different campuses around the CSU have built high-impact practices now into their strategic plans, and I suspect that may also be true of campuses represented on this call, where we're trying to figure out now what is our carrying capacity. How would we divide up the pool of high-impact practices so that if, for example, we find 5 on a campus that we're particularly confident in, we could make sure that they could cover a fifth of the students apiece if they needed to. As we do so, we're continuing to ask how much fidelity to the model is enough. How do we bottle that lightning without just extinguishing it? Our participation in the Taking Student Success Scale network has helped us really on all of the challenges we're facing as far as coming up with consistent inputs, making sure that the enrollment records are valid, and then measuring outcomes in terms not only of persistence and grade point average, but also in terms of changes in the student's disposition and attitudes. I'll stop there and invite any questions.
Well, while you're thinking about questions, let's back up. We had a question to you, Jason. We had a question from Bob Yokish. Can you say more about the Gates grant?
Sorry, I started talking and I was on mute. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the idea is that essentially we are pulling on the collective resources of some of our systems to think about what are the needs of our campuses in terms of implementing data analytics for student success. And then at the sometime late next spring, hoping to roll out some of these tools in a beta version to the TS3 network to get their feedback on how we can further improve and strengthen them, and at some point making some of these things be publicly available across the board. For example, the guiding principles document. Other of the workshops, we might be holding them back more to TS3, partner systems. I think we're still trying to figure that out. But the idea is essentially providing a set of resources that will help campuses better select tools, implement them on their campuses, and then provide professional development for faculty and staff to use them effectively, all with an eye towards student success. Does that help? Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is Rebecca again. So I think what you can hear here is that these systems have each started their work with a few campuses and then been able to broaden that out to additional campuses, really trying to take this to scale. Likewise, in taking student success to scale, we've got some front runners in terms of systems that are doing this, and we've got other systems that are very interested in how to learn from those experiences and take it to scale across their systems. And that's really the basic premise of the way we've organized our work. As we've done this, we've learned some things. We've heard from a lot of people about the challenges of the lack of infrastructure, about this is, the initiative fatigue that Joe mentioned, that this is just yet another thing, that we're trying to take on more than we can handle, and that this just gets to be this push against the resistance that this kind of change can bring about can be pretty overwhelming. And what we found is that this works when we focus on what matters most, and that we also build onto what campuses are already doing. So you'll notice that we know that all of you are already thinking about these issues. These are not new ideas, but they're ideas that we know work, and they're more than ideas. They're actual interventions that we know work. So we want to build on the work that you've already begun on your campuses to help each of you kind of move your agenda more quickly. And that's based on the idea that it's better to get one thing right than to do the whole universe. So a number of our systems and campuses have started with one of these interventions, building out to the others, understanding that we really see them as interlocking and that together they make a holistic strategy. But it may make more sense for you to start in just one place. That we've used the model of piloting and scale, and that's one that we think can be very effective, and that we need to provide a balance between the expertise that we can bring to the table in terms of where this work is already underway with real strategies for improving the implementation, so that those nitty-gritty issues are ones that you are able to get to right away. So we began 2 years ago in October of 2014, and we're very pleased to be recognized by President Obama right as we got started. We've had face-to-face meetings of both the system leads early on and more recently the entire network. We have had a series of webinars, and you can find our earlier webinars, links to those on our website, our NASH website. But you also might want to be looking for coming up next month in December, a webinar from the Tennessee Board of Regents on their co-requisite math work and really impressive results that they've come up with. We're going to hear from the Cal State system and the Colorado system on advances in high impact practices. In January and February, we'll have the math reform initiative from Maryland, and in March we'll come back to predictive analytics again. We also will be having a convening of the network as a whole on April 13th and 14th in Denver, so you might want to get those dates on your calendars. So what I'd like to do now is take questions from you, if you have any. I know that some of you are in systems that are already involved in this initiative, and maybe you're just getting started, so we can put you in touch with the system lead who can provide you with more information about how the work is shaping up in your system. We also know that several of you are in systems that are not yet part of this, and we really hope that you will consider joining us. If you're interested in doing that, you can shoot me an email, we'll set up a call, and I'll go over with you what some of the commitments are that you need to make as a system to be part of this. But our goal is to really reach as many NASH systems as we can with this work, because we really feel that together in NASH and taking student success to the scale, we can really use the collective impact that we've seen be so effective within systems across a network of systems to improve student success. So let me stop and see if you have anybody have any questions for any of us at this point. Yes, we definitely will be sending you. So Brian has asked if the presentation will be available after this session. Lisa has told us that they will be sending the link to the website, to this presentation to all of the participants. If you don't find it there, you'll be able to find it on the NASH website shortly after this is completed. So we definitely will be making it available to you. And if you go to the NASH website, I think you'll find not just this presentation, but a lot more information about the initial ways we were thinking about this work. We've got a host of resources available electronically that we would be very happy to share with you. Other questions? I think Lisa's asking if we should distribute a PDF of the slides as well. Sure, why not? That would be a good idea. People may be able to use them more effectively that way. And either Lisa will do that or Chrissy here at NASH will do that. We'll work that out afterwards, but we'll definitely get you the slides. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today. We're really excited to be reaching more people with this message. We hope that what we've laid out for you will stimulate some interest, and if you would like to follow up in any way to get more information about what we're doing, please don't hesitate to call me or contact me. My email is rebecca@nash-dc.org, and again, you can find us just under NASH, or National Association of System Heads, on the internet. So we look forward to hearing from. There's my email. Thank you, Lisa. We're very happy to have you all today, and want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving.